The letter didn't say please. It didn't say warning. It said pay or lose your home. $1 million. In HOA fines. On a house that wasn't even in their HOA. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about rules. This was about power. See, my family's house had been standing long before the neighborhood existed. Long before manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and laminated violation notices. My grandfather built that home in the 1960s, back when the road out front was dirt and the land around us was nothing but trees and quiet. Then a developer showed up decades later, bought everything around us, built Pinecrest Meadows, and suddenly my little ranch house sat right at the entrance, front and center, like a reminder that not everything could be controlled. That's where Linda Vasquez comes in. HOA president, clipboard queen, the kind of HOA Karen who smiles while sharpening the knife. To her, my house was a problem. The original paint color? Non-compliant. My grandfather's old pickup truck? An eyesore. My vegetable garden? A violation of community aesthetics. Never mind that I wasn't part of the HOA. Never mind that I never signed a single covenant. Linda decided that if everyone had to drive past my house to get to theirs, then I needed to be dealt with. So she started sending letters. 1 violation, then 3, then 17. I ignored every single one. Why wouldn't I? I wasn't in the HOA. They had no authority over me. At least, that's what I thought. Until the day I opened that envelope. Inside was a demand for over $1 million in accumulated fines, along with a notice stating they were placing a lien on my property. And if I didn't comply, foreclosure. My hands went cold. My chest tightened. This wasn't bluffing anymore. This was a loaded weapon pointed straight at a house that had been in my family for 60 years. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called my attorney. Richard, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They're claiming I owe the HOA over $1 million. There was a pause on the line. A long one. Marcus, he finally said, you're not in the HOA. You never signed anything. That's what I thought, I replied. But they're saying I'm in continuous violation, and they're threatening foreclosure. Another pause. This one heavier. Email me everything, he said. And do not respond to them. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. And Richard's voice had changed. Marcus, he said slowly, this is one of the most aggressive HOA overreach cases I've ever seen. My stomach dropped. He explained that Linda had filed a lawsuit 3 years ago claiming my property was technically part of the development because it shared an access road. She argued I was benefiting from HOA-maintained infrastructure, and therefore subject to their rules. That's insane, I said. My grandfather built that road in 1965. I know, Richard replied. But here's the worst part. The lawsuit went through without me ever knowing. Court notices sent to an old address. A default judgment entered. No defense. No hearing. And now Linda was using that judgment to justify the $1 million fine. That's when Richard said the sentence that changed everything. I found something in your grandfather's original deed. And what he found would flip the entire HOA upside down. End of part 1. Continue? Yes or no? Yes, part 2. When Richard said he'd found something in my grandfather's deed, I expected a technicality. A loophole. Maybe a small crack in Linda's armor. I didn't expect a nuclear option. Come to my office, Richard said. This isn't a phone conversation. An hour later, I was sitting across from him, staring at a stack of faded documents spread across his desk. The kind of paper that smells like dust, time, and forgotten leverage. My grandfather's name was typed across the top. Dated 1962. Your grandfather didn't just own the house, Richard said, tapping the page. He owned 17 acres. I blinked. 17. The entire area Pinecrest Meadows sits on today, he replied. That alone was shocking. But then Richard slid another document toward me. The 1989 sale agreement when my grandfather sold 14 of those acres to the developer. Read this clause carefully, he said. I leaned forward. Seller retains perpetual easement rights over all access roads, common areas, and recreational facilities developed on the sold property. Any homeowners association formed must obtain written consent from seller for exclusive use of said areas. I read it again and again. I don't understand, I said. What does this actually mean? Richard smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was surgical. It means your grandfather sold the land, he said, but he never gave up control of the roads or common areas. My pulse started to pound. When Pinecrest Meadows formed their HOA in 2009, Richard continued, they were legally required to get written consent from your family to take exclusive control over the roads, sidewalks, playgrounds, and clubhouse. They never did, I whispered. No, he said. And when your grandfather passed, you inherited all of those rights. The room felt smaller. Marcus, Richard said carefully, you don't just own your 3 acres. He let the words hang. You technically own the legal rights to every road, every sidewalk, every common area, every inch of infrastructure the HOA claims to control. The implications slammed into me all at once. So when Linda says I'm benefiting from HOA roads, I began. She's got it backwards, Richard finished. They've been benefiting from your roads. Roads my grandfather built. Roads my family maintained long before manicured lawns and HOA newsletters existed. For 15 years, the HOA had been operating on land they never had permission to control. I leaned back, my mind racing. Fear was still there, but now it had company. Anger. And something else. Opportunity. What can we do? I asked. Richard didn't hesitate. First, we file a motion to vacate the fraudulent judgment, he said, writing fast on his legal pad. Then we sue Linda Vasquez personally for abuse of process. My eyebrows shot up. And then, he added, pausing, we send the HOA a formal notice. A notice of what? That they're operating on your property without authorization, he said. And that you're revoking access. My breath caught. You mean? Yes, Richard said calmly. You can legally cut off access to the entire neighborhood. The idea was insane, terrifying, and completely legal. What conditions would we give them? I asked. Richard finally looked up and met my eyes. Whatever you want, he said. But I'd suggest 3 things. He wrote them down. A drop all fines against you. Issue a formal apology. A Linda Vasquez resigns immediately. Can we actually do this? I asked. Richard leaned back in his chair. Marcus, he said, you can evict the HOA from your land if you want to. Outside, the same access road Linda claimed gave her authority sat quietly in the afternoon sun. She thought it was her leverage. She had no idea it was about to become her downfall. The letter Richard sent wasn't loud. It didn't threaten. It didn't bluff. And that's what made it terrifying. Page after page, it laid out the facts with surgical precision. Date, deed, easement clauses, legal obligations the HOA had ignored for 15 years. There was no emotion in it, just reality. The core message was simple. Pinecrest Meadows HOA was operating on my land without permission. Effective immediately, that permission was revoked, unless conditions were met. Within hours, the HOA board was in full panic mode. Emails flew. Emergency calls were scheduled. Rumors spread faster than lawn violation notices ever had. Residents were confused, angry, and scared. Because for the first time, the HOA didn't have power. They were standing on ground that didn't belong to them. And then my phone rang. Linda Vasquez. I answered. This is extortion, she snapped, her voice shaking. You can't threaten to cut off access to people's homes. I stayed calm. That seemed to make her angrier. Actually, Linda, I said, I can. Those are my roads. My grandfather built them. You never had permission to take control. The HOA has maintained those roads for 15 years, she shouted. And my family maintained this property for nearly 60, I replied. That didn't stop you from trying to find me $1 million. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. You're insane, she said. I'll have you arrested. For what? I asked. Enforcing my property rights? The same thing you claim you were doing to me? Silence. Then rage. This neighborhood will turn on you, she hissed. You're holding them hostage. No, I said. I'm giving them a choice. I explained exactly what was going to happen. She would call an emergency HOA meeting. She would present my attorney's letter. And the board would decide whether her personal vendetta was worth losing legal access to their own neighborhood. She hung up without another word. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday, at the community clubhouse, which, ironically, sat squarely on land I had easement rights to. Richard advised me not to attend. Let the documents speak, he said. I ignored him. I wanted to see Linda's face when her authority collapsed. The room was packed. Homeowners crowded in, whispering, confused by the urgent notice about a property access crisis. Linda stood at the front with the board, jaw tight, posture rigid. She opened with a speech. She framed me as a difficult neighbor, a problem holdout, someone threatening the community. But she didn't count on one thing. Richard had already mailed every homeowner a copy of the document. A man in the third row stood up holding the papers. My name is Robertson, he said. I'm a real estate attorney. I reviewed these. Mr. Williams is absolutely correct. Murmurs rippled through the room. The original easement was never transferred, Robertson continued. Legally, he has every right to control access to the common areas. Linda slammed her hand on the table. This is a technicality, she snapped. No, a woman near the aisle said, standing up. This is you harassing someone because you don't like how his house looks. She waved a stack of papers. 17 violations for a vegetable garden? For parking a truck. Another voice joined in. You filed a lawsuit using a fake address so he couldn't defend himself. That's fraud, someone else shouted. The room erupted. Linda's face went red. Everything I did was to protect property values, she yelled. That's when I stood up. And every head turned. What's hurting this neighborhood, I said calmly, is an HOA president who abuses her power and tries to steal someone's home over personal spite. The applause was immediate. And devastating. Linda knew it was over. But the vote hadn't even happened yet. The room felt electric. People weren't whispering anymore. They were standing, pointing, demanding answers. Linda tried to regain control, pounding the table like authority could be summoned by noise alone. Order, she snapped. This meeting is out of control. But it was already slipping through her fingers. Robertson stepped forward again, calm but firm. The issue isn't whether Mr. Williams is difficult. The issue is whether this board knowingly acted outside its legal authority. That landed hard. Another homeowner raised their hand, voice shaking, not with fear, but anger. Did you or did you not use an outdated address to file that lawsuit? Linda hesitated. That hesitation said everything. You tried to foreclose on a man's home, someone shouted, without ever letting him defend himself. The board members beside her shifted uncomfortably. These weren't villains. They were neighbors who had trusted the wrong person with too much power. Linda snapped back. That house is dragging down our values. The words echoed in the room. I stepped forward. My grandfather built that house, I said. He built the road you all drove on to get here tonight. And for 60 years, no one had a problem with it, until someone decided rules were more important than rights. Silence. Then clapping. Then more. The motion to remove Linda from the board was called. The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, Linda Vasquez was no longer HOA president. She stood there frozen, mouth opening and closing, like authority had been unplugged from the wall. But the fallout didn't stop there. The board agreed, on the spot, to drop every fine against me. Issue a formal written apology. and overhaul the entire violation system. In exchange, I agreed to grant the HOA proper easement rights, this time legally, with protections that prevented future harassment. Linda stormed out before the meeting even ended. But justice wasn't finished with her. Richard's investigation into the lawsuit uncovered something worse than overreach. It uncovered intent. She had knowingly falsified documents, knowingly used an incorrect address, knowingly denied me the chance to defend my property. We sued her personally. Abuse of process, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The case never went to trial. She settled $47,000 in damages and legal fees. She resigned from the HOA entirely. And 3 months later, she sold her house. I never saw her again. A week after she left, there was a knock at my door. Robertson stood on my porch holding a bottle of wine and a handwritten letter. "Most of us didn't know," he said quietly. "We thought the violations were legitimate. We didn't realize she was manufacturing them out of spite." I nodded. "Power makes people bold." He smiled. "We've changed everything. Violations now require 3 board members. No more personal vendettas." Then he handed me another document. "We'd like to offer you honorary HOA membership," he said. "No fees. No obligations. Just respect." I laughed. "I'll accept," I said. "On one condition." "What's that?" "I keep my vegetable garden." He grinned. "Deal." But the real ending to this story? It wasn't in a courtroom. It was growing in my front yard. 3 months later, the quiet returned. Not the nervous kind of quiet. The kind that comes after a storm when everything broken has already fallen. The kind where things finally make sense again. I was standing in my front yard, hands in the dirt, tending to my tomatoes and zucchini. The garden had grown since the meeting. Spread wider. Healthier. Like it finally felt safe to exist. No violation notices. No threatening letters. No Linda. Neighbors slowed as they drove past now, but not to glare. To wave. A few even stopped to ask questions. "What fertilizer are you using? How did you keep the tomatoes from splitting? Do you sell any of this?" That still made me laugh. The same front yard that had once been labeled an eyesore was now a point of conversation. Of connection. Turns out people didn't actually hate gardens. Someone had just told them they were supposed to. My grandfather's old pickup truck still sat in the driveway. Same faded paint. Same dented tailgate. But now it had company. Robertson's classic Mustang showed up most weekends when he stopped by to talk, or just sit on the porch and decompress from HOA business. Funny how quickly things change when bullies lose the microphone. The access road, the one that started everything, had been repaved again. This time with full transparency. HOA funds, my written consent, my input. They even asked me about materials. And at the entrance of Pinecrest Meadows there was something new. A small metal plaque. Original road built by George Williams, 1965. I stood there staring at it longer than I expected to. Linda never wanted to protect property values. She wanted control. She wanted uniformity. She wanted obedience. And when she couldn't get it, she tried to erase the problem, me. But what she never understood was this. Authority without legitimacy is just bullying. And bullies panic when the paperwork doesn't back them up. The $1 million fine that once felt like a death sentence now felt absurd. A number designed to scare, to crush, to force compliance without resistance. If I had panicked, if I had paid, if I had signed anything, she would have one. Instead, fax one. Deed, date, right. And something else the HOA Karen never accounted for. Memory. My grandfather knew what he was doing when he wrote that easement clause. He knew one day someone might forget where the roads came from. Forget who built them. Forget that communities don't start with rules. They start with people. The new HOA president gets that. The board gets that. And the neighborhood feels different now. Lighter. Less hostile. less obsessed with control and more focused on coexistence. Sometimes I think about Linda, about how far she pushed, how convinced she was that power came from position, how shocked she looked when the room turned on her. She didn't lose because I was aggressive. She lost because she was wrong. And that's the part most HOA Karens never prepare for. They assume no one will fight back. They assume paperwork scares people into silence. They assume authority goes unquestioned. Until it doesn't. Until the person they tried to crush turns out to own the ground they're standing on. And the scariest part? This kind of overreach happens everywhere. Most people just never find the clause that stops it. Every time I tell this story, someone asks the same question. Weren't you scared? The honest answer? Terrified. Because when an HOA comes after your home, they don't just threaten money. They threaten stability, history, identity. They make you feel small on purpose. Like resistance is pointless and compliance is the only way out. That's how HOA Karens win. They count on panic. They count on people not knowing their rights, not checking old deeds, not questioning default judgments quietly slipped through the system. Linda Vasquez didn't expect me to fight back. She expected me to fold, to sell, to disappear so the entrance to her perfect neighborhood looked the way she wanted. And for a moment it almost worked. That $1 million number wasn't random. It was designed to overwhelm, to make any alternative feel impossible. But here's what I learned. The loudest authority is often the weakest one. Real power doesn't scream through violation letters. It sits quietly in documents no one bothers to read anymore. When Richard told me I could technically evict the HOA from my land, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt validated, like the truth finally caught up to the intimidation. And that's the part that still amazes me. One HOA president, one clipboard, one personal grudge. That's all it took to nearly erase 60 years of family history. If not for that easement clause, the outcome would have been very different. Not because she was right, but because she was relentless. And that's what scares me about stories like this. For every homeowner who finds the winning document, there are dozens who don't. Who pay fines they don't owe. Who tear out gardens they love. Who repaint homes that were never a problem until someone decided uniformity mattered more than humanity. After Linda left, the new board invited feedback. Real feedback. Residents spoke openly, for the first time, about how uncomfortable the violation culture had made them feel. Parents talked about their kids being scared of the HOA lady. Elderly residents admitted they paid fines just to avoid confrontation. People confessed they stopped enjoying their own homes. That's not community. That's compliance under pressure. Now, things are different. Violations are rare. Warnings come with conversations. And the phrase property values doesn't automatically end discussions anymore. As for me, I still live in the same house, still drive the same truck, still grow more vegetables than I can eat. And I keep a copy of my grandfather's deed framed in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Rights don't protect themselves. You have to know them. You have to assert them. And sometimes you have to stand up in a room full of people and say, no. This ends here. Because once you do, even the loudest HOA Karen runs out of words. But there's one last detail I haven't told you yet. The part that made this victory feel complete. The final twist didn't come from a lawsuit, or a meeting, or a check with a lot of zeros on it. It came quietly. One afternoon, I was watering the garden. Sun high, soil warm, tomatoes heavy on the vine, when a family pulled over at the entrance of Pinecrest Meadows. The father pointed at the small plaque by the road. Original road built by George Williams, 1965. His kid asked, "Who's that?" The father shrugged. "Probably the guy who started all this." I smiled and kept watering. That's when it hit me. Linda wanted control over appearances, over perception, over what belonged. But history doesn't care about clipboards. Legacy doesn't need approval. My grandfather didn't just build a house. He built the foundation of an entire neighborhood, and protected it with ink on paper long before anyone knew what an HOA Karen was. Linda tried to erase that with violation notices. Instead, she accidentally turned it into a permanent marker. She lost her position, her reputation, her money, and eventually her home. Not because I was ruthless, but because she was reckless. The HOA learned something too. Rules don't create community. Respect does. You can't fine people into belonging. You can't bully someone into submission and call it governance. And the moment an HOA forgets that, they stop being an association and start being a liability. Today, Pinecrest Meadows still exist. Lawns are trimmed. Kids ride bikes. The clubhouse hosts barbecues instead of emergency meetings. And every single person who drives and passes the same house, the one that refused to disappear, the one that didn't match, the one that fought back. The garden is bigger now, on purpose, because every time someone asks why it's allowed, the answer is simple. Because it always was. So if you ever get a letter that feels bigger than it should, if someone in authority tells you compliance is your only option, if fear is the main tool they're using, pause, read the fine print, and remember, authority without legitimacy is just bullying. And bullies are never prepared for someone who actually knows their rights. I picked a ripe tomato, warm from the sun, and took a bite. It tasted like victory. And it tasted like home.